finally hard time.
Radio Free Innsmouth episode 397, finally covering the great Slough Feg, one of the finest modern heavy metal bands, and indeed one of the better heavy metal bands over the course of the entire history of the genre. I always planned on doing something with them on this show, but I got the requisite kick in the butt about a month ago to listen to them intensely enough to do an episode. When I was hanging out with the homies, we'd drive to the liquor store, dude slaps a CD into the player, and I'm like, bro, is that some... And he was like, hell yeah, brother, you know it's some of that type action. Blew my mind. I've known this guy for like well over a decade. Didn't even know he was into Slough Feg. It seems like usually when I hear people talking about Slough Feg, it's more of an internet thing. You don't run into Slough Feg fans that often in the wild, at least where I'm at. So hopefully in my own little way I can do something to alleviate that situation. Cause Slough Feg's fucking great. Every album. And the heart and soul of that has always been guitarist, vocalist, and principal songwriter Mike Scalzi, going back to 1990 when it wasn't very cool to be playing this sort of very old school type of heavy metal. I mean, there's other guys that have been in the band for relatively extended amounts of time. I think he's had Adrian on bass since 2003's Traveler. Notably, John Cobbett was Mike's co-guitarist during one of their most fruitful periods that roughly coincided with Mike Scalzi also being in John's band Hammers of Misfortune, which are also a band that you should check out if you haven't already. Drummers, they've been through a fuckload of them.
He died in a bizarre gardening accident some years back.
My personal favorite was probably Harry Cantwell during the 07 to 2014 period encompassing the Ape Uprising, Animal Spirits, and Digital Resistance albums. But it's definitely, it's Mike's band. Mike's the guy. And he recently did a very cool in-depth interview with Andrew Lee from Rip to Shreds that's well worth checking out if you're a Slough Feg diehard, where he went into some of his influences as a guitarist, and it really kind of tickled my confirmation bias. It confirmed a lot of things that I'd long suspected. You see, most people when they think of Slough Feg, they think, okay, these guys basically the modern Thin Lizzy. This is due to several factors. The usage of Gaelic, the very 70s sound, the twin guitar attack, and they got a ton of riffs that sound like... But for me, I always saw that as sort of a gross oversimplification. No offense to Thin Lizzy, they're one of my favorite bands. I own most of their albums. But there always seemed to be something more going on in the background than just Thin Lizzy worship with Slough Feg. I heard all kinds of different weird stuff going on back there, and it was confirmed during this interview, where Mike specifically stated that his two favorite guitarists when he was starting Slough Feg were not Brian Robertson and Scott Gorham. Rather, they were Greg Ginn from Black Flag and Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. I heard that, I was like, yeah, no shit. I always heard a ton of Sabbath and Slough Feg sound. It's just that it wasn't the aspects of Sabbath that most people who claim Sabbath influence utilize. The example Mike gave in the interview was this riff from A National Acrobat off of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Undeniably a signature Sabbath riff, but your average Sabbath-influenced stoner doom band generally won't incorporate that aspect of Sabbath's sound. We're talking about the weirder, more prog, very colorful kind of shit you see showing up on records like Volume 4, Technical Ecstasy. Essentially, you can think of it like this. You mention the song Symptom of the Universe to most Sabbath fans, they're going to be like, oh yeah, the one that goes like... But if you bring that song up to Mike Scalzi, I'm assuming he'd be like, oh yeah, I love that song. That's the one that goes... Or perhaps even... Like that part right there sounded very Slough Feg-ish to me, so it's worth listening for that when you put on a Slough Feg record. In addition, yeah, there's the weird, more noisy side of things coming from mid-80s Black Flag. There's a lot of Voivod, and that's all mixed with just about every old school heavy metal band of note that you've ever heard of, as well as a lot of prog rock, a lot of folky stuff. That creates the Slough Feg sound. That is worth bringing up. I keep saying Slough Feg. I'm not saying the full name of the band, the Lord Weird Slough Feg. You see, part of the reason it took me so long to do a Slough Feg episode is, as I mentioned earlier, all their albums are great. I'm familiar with all of them. I actually own all of them, except for the first one, which can't be bought off Discogs unless you possess
$1 million.
So it would be a bit of a challenge to cover every Slough Feg album on one episode. And the way I decided to get around that is, so they got their first 4 albums, as well as their most recent full-length album. Those are all labeled as the Lord Weird Slough Feg. During the gap between 2003 and 2019, all their albums just say Slough Feg. So fuck it. We're going to be talking about the ones that just say Slough Feg on them this time around. Eventually, we'll cover the Lord Weird albums as well. It's all the same band, the Lord Weird Slough Feg. I'm just doing a little bit of logistics trickery. So to anybody that was down there in the comments doing your little whataboutism dance, what about the Red Branch? What about the Great Ice Wars? What about Sky Chariots? What about High Passage, Low Passage?
Don't you feel silly? Don't you feel stupid?
Plus, I got into Slough Feg during the time period when the albums just said Slough Feg on them. Specifically, the one that really sold this band to me was 2009's classic Ape Uprising. And it's still one of my favorite albums of theirs to this day, so definitely a good place to start. There's a whole lot of variety to this album. It actually starts out with a track that goes somewhat against that whole weirder Sabbath thing I was setting up earlier on in the episode. It's entitled The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which, as far as I'm aware, is the only Slough Feg song that's just straight up doom metal. It's also got a great song title, definitely showing off Slough Feg's own brand of morbid humor.
Quasimodo predicted all this.
Who did what?
And if it wasn't for Mike's very recognizable vocals, you could probably trick someone into thinking this was a Gates of Slumber or even a St. Vitus song. The St. Vitus thing definitely makes sense, given that whole combo influence of Black Flag and Black Sabbath. That was a big thing for the Vitus boys, and it's a big thing for fucking Slough Feg. And despite being an atypical Slough Feg sort of song, it also shows off one of the more typical aspects of their sound, that being lyrics based heavily in literature, something which they inherited from another one of their major influences, that being Iron Maiden. Now, The Hunchback of Notre Dame is a good enough doom metal song that honestly shows off these guys could make it as a doom metal band if they so chose. But because it's Slough Feg, it's more of a weird diversion in an album that's essentially a series of different, very experimental diversions. There is something of a unifying concept to this album in the form of the
apes together strong
idea implied by the title. The title track, Ape Uprising, is explicitly about Planet of the Apes. Simian Manifesto and Ape Outro also deal with the whole monkeys rising up type concept. And even White Cousin, depending on how you look at the lyrics, it could be about Beneath the Planet of the Apes. It could be about more broadly post-apocalyptic 70s science fiction like Zardoz. Might even be about the friggin' Morlocks in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. But that ape concept kind of runs through the veins of this record very strongly, and it's interesting seeing them tackle it from a couple different angles. Because the title track, it's a fucking epic. The longest song Slough Feg has ever done. A truly simian Iliad, if you will. Got a big old long instrumental intro where they gradually introduce the different instruments before then breaking out into something of an ostinato, kind of the main theme of the track. Sort of an overture before Mike Scalzi comes in and starts narrating this tale of the rise of the Planet of the Apes, under which the guitar riffs kind of quote back to that instrumental intro in various little segments. Like right here, this is the tail end of that bit from the intro, but sped up a little bit with the vocal part over it. Then it goes into a full stop. Then when the music comes back in, we're hit with this very potent rising action that starts off the Ape Rebellion, which is mostly conveyed via instrumentals. Very long instrumental sections in this song. A lot of real nice guitar harmonies. And real catchy riffs. Massive parcel of riffs, which has always been a trademark for Slough Feg. Never before were there ever such a parcel of riffs in a band. And Michael popped back in on the vocals occasionally to kind of direct the action, with very well written lyrics, I might add, before we then jump back into more instrumental sections where you're left to kind of visualize this whole Ape Uprising on your own. This little harmonized section here, definitely kind of Thin Lizzy sounding. Then the energy picks up and it gets a little bit more Iron Maiden-ish. But again, it doesn't really sound like they're ripping off either band. More than anything else, it just sounds like Slough Feg. This part coming up right here is really cool, and it reminds me of another one of their major influences, that being Cirith Ungol. The whole sort of staccato burst of guitar noise followed by a bass fill, and then into just pure double bass melodic power metal shit. Fucking expertly done, very high energy. Guitar harmony is going absolutely nuts here. And then towards the tail end of it, when we get into the solos, the rhythm guitar playing takes on something of an aggressive hard rock cast in the 70s mold. And despite the fact they're more well known as a riff-based band, their lead guitar playing is always fantastic. And the way they come out of the solo section here, they do that Iron Maiden style riff, but they've slowed it down to the pace of how the song opened. And you realize that whole thing was just a variation off of a musical fragment from the intro, okay? It's very intelligently written stuff. It utilizes those 10 minutes to take you on a very complex musical journey. So you've got that direct narrative, the whole Ape Uprising, but as I mentioned earlier, there's shorter songs that also deal with the ape concept, often in a more metaphorical sort of way. My personal favorite of these gotta be Simian Manifesto. The beginning of the song utilizes that same staccato burst technique from towards the end of that longer Ape Uprising song, crafting some very catchy heavy metal, which is always appreciated. But then when the song structure opens up, you get hit with my personal favorite riff. This whole riff sequence right here is what actually got me into Slough Feg way back in the day. Fucking awesome riff. Then you get this sort of extended instrumental freakout section, which features a lot of very different contrasting guitar parts kind of shouting at each other over the canyon of those very quick full stops. It reminds me a lot of early Cirith Ungol, and yes, also a lot of Thin Lizzy. Eventually, the different contrasting parts kind of tie together in a more of a aggressive sounding minor key thing before it all slows down to total Sabbath worship. But in this case, it's that weird Sabbath, you know, the kind of Sabbath that a lot of the Sabbath worship bands out there don't necessarily draw from the well of. Off the top of my head, the only doom metal band I can think of doing stuff that sounds explicitly like this, apart from Slough Feg, would be fucking Iron Man, who of course are also one of my favorite bands. Covered them 4 years ago on episode 188. Spirit Caravan too. Spirit Caravan does stuff like this. But your average doom metal band doesn't do stuff like that. So Ape Uprising, absolutely one of my favorite Slough Feg albums. From what I've seen of people talking about Slough Feg on the internet, a lot of people don't really hold this one up high as an example of Slough Feg songwriting, which I disagree with, but usually people seem to point more to the albums right before this one or right after it. And yeah, both of those are definitely maybe more standard Slough Feg type albums, particularly in the case of the follow-up, The Animal Spirits. I mean, that's some of the sloughest feg to ever slough a feg.
Are you trying to give me the double talk?
And Ape Uprising's immediate predecessor, Hardworlder, also has a lot of stuff in that vein.
The spheres in motion, wrapped around a collapsing star.
But overall, I actually prefer Hardworlder to The Animal Spirits because, while it isn't as out there as Ape Uprising, it has similar traits of experimentation and variation in songwriting approaches. For instance, the title track. Is something of a prelude to the more epic direction they would go in on the title track on Ape Uprising. But my personal favorite track on this album is entitled Frankfurt Hahn Airport Blues. Perhaps the most aggressive heavy metal song ever written about being stuck in an airport. Trust me, this shit's fucking wild. Starts off very proto-thrash speed metal-y, moving at quite a good clip for such an old-school heavy metal song. You might notice the solo here sounds a whole lot like something you might hear on a Merciful Fate album. The follow-up section completely confirms that with a total Merciful Fate-style evil blues riff, with the lead guitars kind of circling around, sweeping in from the side to carve parts of it up, doing these trade-off bits. Haven't really seen anybody talk about this song before, but damn if it isn't one of my personal favorite Slough Feg songs. Real cool Thin Lizzy style solo at the end there too. Solid fucking album, Hardworlder, and as I mentioned, it's a little bit more experimental, more in line with Ape Uprising than it is with other Slough Feg releases. Speaking of that, perhaps the main album I wanted to talk about today, the follow-up to The Animal Spirits, 2014's Digital Resistance. This one seems to get pretty heavily shit on by most of the Slough Feg fan base. It seems like even the band are kind of lukewarm on it, based on what I've been able to infer from interviews over the years. But I bought this album the day it came out, and to this day, I absolutely love it. I can pretty much play the whole album inside my head if I want to. This one's got all kinds of weird musical stylistic diversions on it, which might turn some people off. For instance, the opening track, the delightfully entitled Analog Avengers / Bertrand Russell's Sex Den, takes on something of a whimsical progressive rock cast. And that's actually Mike himself playing the organ here. You know, it's kind of funny that this album came out 10 years after John Cobbett was no longer involved with Slough Feg, and yet, out of all the Slough Feg releases, it's the one that most resembles Hammers of Misfortune, at least to my ears. Maybe it's the more hard rock approach, maybe it's just the overall weirdness, the proggy shit going on with the organ. I can see why this might disappoint certain Slough Feg fans, but I think it's fantastic. You might remember from when I was talking about the song title, there's a slash there. This is actually kind of two different songs combined. The transition happens when it starts to slow down right here. We left behind Analog Avengers, which was more generally skeptical about modern technology, and moved into Bertrand Russell's Sex Den, which was described by Mike as being a very verbose riff on the same ideas as the Police's Don't Stand So Close to Me. One of the more interesting things about Mike Scalzi is that he's actually a philosophy professor, so a lot of Slough Feg songs deal with more weighty philosophical concepts, but in this case, the whole professorship thing comes through in a much more visceral way, specifically dealing with issues he's encountering in everyday life. So that opening track is probably my third favorite song on this release. My second favorite gotta be Ghastly Appendage, which is one of the weirdest Slough Feg songs. And that's saying something because they're already a weird fucking band. Like, bro, who fucking put the Vector album on? Fucking wacky, diminished, dissonant, I don't know what the fuck. But it ties in beautifully with this more sort of epic, almost kind of Manowar meets Thin Lizzy power metal type shit that very much takes advantage of this two-note accent at the end of every musical phrase, which becomes something of a running pattern with this song. This part right here, you think it's going to be Iron Maiden-y, but then they start choking off those musical phrases with palm muting before going back into the weird, dissonant, voivod Pink Floyd shit, then they hit the accent. And from there, we really go in the wacky world with this almost kind of psychedelic take on outlaw rock, maybe country western. This happens a few times on this album, also notably in the song Habeas Corpses. Great song title there. Then we're going back into the more Thin Lizzy-ish harmonized guitars that eventually take us back into that more choked off sort of musical phrase with, again, the all-important two-note accent. Just a quality fucking song overall. It's pretty short at only 3 minutes and 20 seconds, but you feel like you went on something of a musical journey equivalent to a more epic track like Ape Uprising. And now for my personal favorite track on this album, and possibly my personal favorite Slough Feg track overall, Laser Enforcer.
Laser Enforcer.
This one fucks. From what I've seen, even people that generally dislike this album still have to admit that this cut in particular is something special. The way it starts out, it's kind of one of their more straightforward Iron Maiden-ish melodic heavy metal tracks, but that shouldn't be taken as a slight at all. This is like the perfection of that musical form. Catchy riffs, clever lyrics, everything you're looking for. Plenty of Thin Lizzy, plenty of Iron Maiden, but during the more angular riffing moments like this part right here, almost gives me a bit of a loudness vibe, which I appreciate. But then we get into the instrumental section of the song, and holy fuck. That's what I'm talking about, okay? It's parts like that. That's why Slough Feg is one of the best currently active modern heavy metal bands, as well as one of the best just heavy metal bands overall, going back decades. Fucking awesome. And what's even crazier is after all that, when the song kind of loops back around to the regular verses, it'll have another instrumental section that's even more nuts.
To witness the one that steals the show.
Alright, here we go. This shit's fucking crazy. Gives all the different instruments a chance to show off before building up into this almost weird soundscape built entirely with old school heavy metal ingredients. Like if Klaus Schulze or Edgar Froese were in an 80s heavy metal band, they'd probably be doing shit like this. Check out these like palm muted kind of alternate picking things going on here, building tension, eventually jumping back into that melody that I love so much. Fuck, this song rules. This whole album rules. You know what? I don't care who you are. If you talk shit on Digital Resistance, I don't trust you. I think there might be something wrong with your brain. But hey, that's just one man's opinion. Like I said, every Slough Feg album is awesome. And maybe if enough people give a shit about this episode, I'll do one about some of the other albums, alright? How's that for a nice deal? Anyways, thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Very well then. I'll be out of your way. But remember this, gentlemen. I have a lot of free time.